one of the things I'm trying to do, so what I'm doing is I'm reducing the content of the book to notes, i.e. bullet points. I'm trying to make it as accessible for you guys as possible. Now, the notes that you're going to get, they are not a great substitute for the book because they're going to leave out all the illustrations, which the illustrations in the book are actual conversations between a husband and wife. So if I included those, my notes would end up being as long as the book. Okay, so that's point one. However, the notes are going to be exceptional for going back and reviewing because they cover all the major content of the book. So for instance, the set of notes I have, which I will email to those who attend tonight, cover the first 4 chapters actually. Now, I'm going to welcome everybody. We're officially starting. Welcome all those on live stream. I want to give you a brief introduction, tell you where this course is going to go, tell you a few things. My goal is to spend the first 15 minutes with teaching and then let you guys immediately launch into the exercises. Raise your hand if you have the book and with you tonight. Great. Raise your hand if you don't have the book. Don't be afraid. Okay, now we have to stop and interrogate each and every one of you as to why. No. Now I need to ask a question again. How many of you that just walked in do not have the book with you? With y'all. Okay, that means everybody's great. Good. Okay, so I'll come back to where I was going. Don't worry, we have a backup plan for you. Don't worry, you don't have to go home. The first thing I want to say, because I don't know everybody that's here, is you don't have to be a Christian to go through this material. You don't have to be a Christian to go through this material. Like, if you're not a Christian, you're not there yet, or you decided you never will be there, do we still want you to experience healing and help in your marriage? Absolutely. We care. We care at Gospel Life. We definitely care about families. This is such a great opportunity that you have. You don't know that because you haven't seen it, but you soon will. So my role in this course is I'm here as your guide. I'm here to help. I'm here to serve you guys. And it's to provide structure for you. Because if I just left you all alone and said, go read this book, do the exercises, without the structure and with the complexity and busyness of life, chances are it might end up collecting dust on your shelf. So in this scenario, you got 8 weeks to get in, get out, start practicing what you learn, okay? It's going to be good. So you have some structure. I am going to further, as far as my role, going to repeat as much as I can all the major bullet points, the primary content of the book. And I'm also going to provide you with a PDF that gives a synopsis of the book through every chapter, and I'll begin to do that even tonight, so that you can review this. And the reason why review is important is because a lot of people make progress, but then they slide back into old habits in what we call the maintenance phase of growth. A maintenance phase is, hey, you've learned some new content and you're doing it and practicing it, but next thing you know, because the old patterns are still hardwired in your brain, you can end up reverting to those before the new thought patterns, which lead to actions, are hardwired, okay? So the PDFs I'm going to provide for you are going to allow you to review, but very briefly, and you're going to have a lot of aha moments. And those study notes will be very helpful, especially once you're familiar with the concepts and the vocabulary. Which leads me to a next point is that one of the points of this class is to provide you with a new working vocabulary. A functional one that really makes sense and gets traction with real life, day-to-day rubber meets the road stuff. Okay? Like it is like synonymous with having aha moments. Like, oh yeah, that's what's happening. So that's going to allow you to categorize the patterns that have already been emerging in your interactions with your spouse. You're going to be able to call them out, and actually, which is really important because you need to be able to recognize them when they're emerging. This is going to facilitate that process. All right, next, I want you to commit to all 8 weeks. Not because, here's why I want this. Because all the material builds on itself. It's cumulative. Okay? It's a package deal, guys. It all works together. That's why I want you to be here all 8 weeks. I'm not trying to pressure you, shame you, guilt you, whatever. I want you to get the full benefit. Okay, now some of you have situations, circumstances that are beyond your control, whereby you're not going to be able to be here all 8 weeks. I get that. I'm going to try not to come to your house and harass you. I will try. But you're really, to get the full benefit, you're going to need to go back and make sure you complete it. Okay? Now again, I'm going to provide the notes to make it easy for you. I want to do everything I can to make this process easy for you guys. So if there's something I haven't thought of, let me know. I will try to do that. So try to be here all 8 weeks. Because of that cumulative effect, it all is a package deal versus being hit and miss. If you're hit and miss, a lot of times what happens in my experience is if people are hit and miss, when the course is all done, they say, yeah, that whole course Timothy was so excited about, not very helpful. But you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So don't blame the course. Don't blame me. Don't blame the course because you didn't give it your full effort, okay? I want to argue, I would argue, this is a money-back guarantee. Like, I want you to get your money's worth, your time's worth, okay? I really do, and I really believe you will. I'm convinced of that, and otherwise we wouldn't even be here right now. Okay, a couple more things. We're just building a foundation for which we can build on the next 8 weeks. Some of you may find that you're already doing a lot of what's already in this book. You're already doing it. Is this class for you a waste of time? No, it's not. It's actually going to, if that's the case, it's going to actually cause you to more fully appreciate what you have. The benefit for you then is that the principles are being called out, named, and categorized. You will become more aware when you're exercising the principles, and you'll become more skilled at helping others as you become familiar with the principles and vocabulary. How many of you ever encounter someone who's struggling in their marriage? Have you ever, someone come alongside you and is pouring out, maybe venting to you, and you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know, I don't know. Like, wouldn't you want to know something so you can help them? Your loved one, the person you care about, your friend, your neighbor, your relative? For those of you who are already doing this, it's going to call it out, give you a vocabulary, and more fully enable you to help others. Some of you, others of you, potentially, have a marriage that is struggling significantly. Now, when a marriage is struggling significantly, we have a tendency to fantasize about how awesome it would be if we could escape. Okay? And in those moments, it's like we are incapable of fully appreciating that which we have. And if you're in that, then you may not be at the place where you can fully appreciate what you have until you don't have it anymore. Okay? So if your marriage is struggling significantly, the question is, are you willing to do something about it? You're here, or you're on live stream, that means you're willing to do something about it. I'm greatly encouraged, okay? You're doing something about it. The alternative to that would be to be resigned to the fact that you have no intimacy and romance in your marriage, and you're not going to have any for the rest of your life. Sound good? So for instance, let's say, if you're old-ish like me, you're going to have 3,000 more intimate experiences with your spouse. And let's say you're in such a bad place right now that the next 5 to 10 dates that you have don't go well. But can you see, if it's the next 5 to 10 don't go well, instead of giving up, if you press in and start practicing, because things aren't always going to go well, that's only 0.5% for all the rest of the intimate experiences you could end up having with your spouse involving romance. Wouldn't that be worth the effort? What if going through this course, through this time, is going to save you from divorce, a divorce that you don't yet know is going to happen? It has that potential, as you're going to see. So, if I were to ask you, how did you meet your spouse? Now, some of you listening, and you can take this either for yourself or for those around you. If you want to know how bad things have gotten, or if there's hope for your marriage, here's one way to tell. If I ask you, what were the circumstances surrounding how you met your spouse? How did you get together? How did you end up getting married? What was, how did you end up dating? Whatever. If there becomes a sparkle in your eye, some magic, you feel a little warmth in your heart, there's a lot of hope. But if I ask you about the surrounding circumstances regarding that, and all you can think of is the negative stuff that happened, then there's not a lot of hope. And we need to hurry up and get to the emergency room, okay? As we're soon going to do. Because that would be an indication that you've already given up. And I want to encourage you, the fact that you're here means you haven't given up. All right. Here's the thing I also want to encourage. Just going to say this just to cover all my bases. We have a tendency in marriage, I've been married 18 years, we have a tendency in marriage to think, it just makes sense to us, that all the problems lie in the other person. Have you found that to be true? It's always the other person? You're looking at me like you have no idea what I'm talking about. You've never felt that way. Man, that's so good of you guys. You guys should be up here teaching me. But if we were to think that way, and it ended up in divorce, can I just remind us of the fact that you are going to carry those problems with you wherever you go. That is why the second marriage has a 50% less chance of making it than the first marriage, and the third marriage significantly less than that. Why is that? Because you take it with you. You take it with you. So why lose a marriage that you're currently in when it can completely be salvaged? None of you were forced at gunpoint to marry the person you married, right? Which tells me at some point there was intimacy and romance, which means you liked the person you're married to, right? That's good. That's good. That's a great thing, because I want you to remember that, because guess what? I want to give you hope right now, because we can get back there. If you're not there now, we can get back there. You definitely can. All right? But we can't keep doing the same thing expecting different results. Now, here's the thing about marriage. It's an immaterial thing, which means you can't know what you're missing until you have it. You can't know what you're missing until you have it. So trust me, if you talk to people with awesome marriages, it is well worth the effort, because I would argue, based on even some scripture in Proverbs, that your marriage and how it's doing, it has the potential and capacity to make your life a living hell or heaven. It really is that influential. I want to keep moving. So much more that can be said there. All right. You're going to fail along the way from time to time. Just know that. Don't give up. It's not the question about when you're going to fail. It's a question of what you do after you fail. Are you going to get back up? You're not going to be an expert right out of the gate at practicing new things, are you? So don't beat yourself up. Just keep going. And try to give each other grace along the way, because each of you are going to fail at times, and we need each other. We need to be gracious, okay? You're going to hear a lot more about that. Okay, so I want to now at this point, I think, begin to run through the material of the first 4 chapters. Because I would like to ask how many read all those chapters. And the reason I would do the first 4 chapters is because the exercises begin at the end of the 4th chapter. And the 4th chapter is only like 3 pages before the exercises start, okay? Now, if you haven't read the material yet, I want to encourage you, if you have limited time to read or go through your Audible version, chapter 3 would be the most significant. Chapter 3 is going to teach you why marriages end in divorce. In fact, he argues that he can tell within like 15 minutes, even for newlyweds, if that marriage is going to end up in divorce or not. Now, you can have the same ability. That's huge, is it not? Just by listening to, say, one conflict conversation, you could determine if that marriage is already headed for divorce by a percentage rate of success that's well into the 90s. That's huge. All right. I will say this. You will need the paper copy or the digital copy because you need the exercises. And so if you can do the Audible version, definitely it's great, but it has to be in addition to the paper or digital Kindle copy, let's say. but it's also available in iBooks if you do that. All right, here we go. And again, my goal here is like to give 15 more minutes, and then I'm going to launch you out into the exercises with you and your spouse. And you can go anywhere in the building where you feel comfortable, okay? All right. Here we go. Most important things that make a marriage strong. What are they? Trust. Trust, mutual respect, commitment. Here's a huge one. It's going to be a repeating theme throughout the book. Guess what? Friendship. Friendship. If I could say one thing, it's friendship. What I usually call, I'm using Gottman's term saying friendship, I usually call it companionship. Everything else flows from the friendship. Everything else, just so you know. You're going to see that. And we're going to begin working on that. If you don't feel like I would argue your spouse needs to be your best friend. Needs to be your best friend. And if that's not the case, we're going to help you get there. Really, we are. Fondness and admiration, so commitment, friendship, fondness, admiration, meaning that you enjoy each other's company. Like if you're going to be stuck on an island with anybody in the world, it's definitely your spouse. Like because you enjoy their company. That is the engine that's going to fuel everything else, okay? The opposite of all the things I just mentioned would be deceit and betrayal. And this is betrayal of any kind. Betrayal is the common thread in all divorce, sexual betrayal or otherwise. Betrayal, which leads to an important definition. I'm going to give you a couple This definition, check it out. If you don't believe what this definition teaches, I want you to change your belief, change your value system, and import this. Because if you'll just import this definition as truth, the truth that I really believe it is practically, it's going to automatically up your chance for success in your marriage. Here it is. It's a definition of betrayal. What is betrayal? Betrayal, or I would say, me personally, adultery. Betrayal or adultery is fundamentally any act or life choice that doesn't prioritize the commitment and put the partner before all others. I love that. That is the way I was raised. That's what my parents modeled for me, but I have discovered in life that that is not the definition for everybody. If that's not your definition, get rid of your old definition, import this one. Now, we could also use this definition to help us define what's called an emotional affair, which are usually precursors, not always, to physical affairs, adultery. But there's a sense in which anything you prioritize over and above your spouse is betrayal. Anything besides God. Because if you put God first, you're never going to betray your spouse, are you? You see how that works? Okay. Now, that leads me to a second principle that's outside of Gottman, from Peterson's new book, which he argues in the 10th chapter. And he says this about the necessity of truth in marriage. Please, if you don't believe this, please make this part of your value system going forward. Trust is trust, which a marriage is based on, requires truth. Trust requires truth. You cannot maintain truth if you lie or if you act in a manner that would require a lie if you were discovered. So any behavior, any lying, or anything that you're doing currently that if you were discovered, you would want to lie about it or feel like you have to lie about it, you got to get rid of that material. You got to get rid of those actions, how you're spending. You got to get rid of it if you want your marriage to be successful. Because if you don't have truth, you don't have trust. And if you don't have trust, you don't have intimacy, you don't have romance, you don't have vulnerability, you don't have a relationship. In fact, if you're doing things your spouse doesn't know about, there's a sense in which they don't fully know you. And if which is to say synonymously that they don't really love you because they don't actually know you because you're putting on an image for them and they can't see you, they can't know you, they can't understand you. because you're not even letting them see, because all they're seeing is the image or the armor that you have on. So I say all that to say, anything you put over and above your spouse is betrayal, and you have to get rid of lying. You have to have absolute truth in your relationship, in your marriage, for success. Believe me, the payoff is great. Like, it is so well worth it to import these values into your worldview, okay? Got to keep moving. Now, some common forms of deceit include being emotionally distant. I said the opposite of trust is deceit. Being emotionally distant, siding with your parent against one's mate, disrespecting the partner, breaking significant promises. Now, this next section, which will be the only thing I have time to go through tonight, it's going to give you the structure whereby Gottman is able to predict divorce. Okay? There's a sequence, and I'm going to try to give it to you in short order as fast as I can. But hopefully it'll click so you can hold on to it. Now, before I get there, a quick quote. In order to have a successful marriage, this is another value you have to have. When my spouse is in pain, the world stops and I listen. When my spouse is in pain, the world stops and I listen. Laser focus. Versus, he or she doesn't care how I feel. All that matters to him or her is getting their way. Can you see the dichotomy there, the disparity? When my spouse is in pain, the world stops and I listen. When you practice that, guess what? Your spouse ends up feeling, seen, known, understood. The result of necessity is romance and intimacy. Okay, now, we're going to go through a sequence of events that are the reasons, and these kind of flow one from the other, and this is why divorce happens. And this is how you can predict divorce, okay? So this is vocabulary I want you to pick up and just import. Like, you got to memorize this stuff to some degree. I just want you to be so familiar that you recognize these things when they're happening in real time. And you will see them. They will emerge. The first one, new vocabulary term, repair attempts. Repair attempts. You're in a conflict. It's going south. You pull back. And you try to restart and do better. It's like waving a white flag. Like hey, wait, let's start over. We got off on the wrong foot. Repair attempts. Repair attempts, we're going to learn more about these. They're essential. You've got to be able to practice them. When your spouse is attempting a repair, allow them to be successful, and vice versa. So repair attempts. This term refers to any statement or action, silly or otherwise, like, okay, it's getting way too heated, and you do something silly to take down the tension. Like you stick out your tongue at each other in a playful way, right? Suddenly the whole vibe changed. It deflated some of the tension. Silly or otherwise, that prevents negativity from escalating out of control. Repair attempts are a secret weapon of emotionally intelligent couples, even though many of these couples aren't aware that they are employing something so powerful. When a couple have a strong friendship, they naturally become experts at sending each other repair attempts and at correctly reading those sent their way. But when couples are in negative override, I'm going to define that for you in a moment, negative override, even a repair attempt as blunt as, hey, I'm sorry, may have a low success rate. The success or failure of a couple's repair attempts is one of the primary factors in whether their marriage is likely to flourish or flounder. And again, what determines the success of their repair attempts is the strength of their marital friendship. So, I'm going to come back to those. So, two definitions again, in addition to the repair attempts. Positive sentiment override, and negative sentiment override. The positivity, like the bank that you've built up of positivity or the bank that you've built up of negativity, becomes the lens through which you're interpreting all the data or actions of your spouse. So you can imagine how a person can make a neutral statement, but if you have a negative sentiment override, you're going to see it negatively versus having a positive sentiment override, which is going to give him or her the benefit of the doubt. So, positive sentiment override. And again, you're either going to have positive sentiment override because of your deep friendship, or you're going to have negative because you've already drifted apart. But again, to give you hope, it can be rectified. So, positive sentiment override is this. Positive thoughts about each other and the marriage are so pervasive that they tend to supersede all the negative stuff. It takes a much more significant conflict for them to lose their equilibrium as a couple than it would otherwise. Their positivity causes them to feel optimistic about each other and their marriage, to have positive expectations about their lives together, and to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Versus negative sentiment override. Everything gets interpreted in an increasingly negative manner. Words said in a neutral tone of voice are taken personally. The husband says, for instance, maybe, "You're not supposed to run the microwave without any food in it." The wife sees this as an attack. So she says something like, "Don't tell me what to do. I'm the one who actually reads manuals." Another battle begins. Do you see? Something neutral was said, but if you have a positive sentiment override versus a negative sentiment override, that's going to determine the interpretation you give to that neutral statement. Okay? So that could be a red flag or alert you to where you're at right now. If you had to do an analysis, where would you say? Would you have more positive sentiment override or more negative sentiment override? Because if you have more negative, and we're even going to begin this tonight, you can begin to build more positive sentiment, which is to say, increase the depth of your friendship. Okay? And guess what? If you do that on the positive end proactively, then when it comes to those neutral statements, you're going to get a lot more positive feedback than you would otherwise. Okay? All right. Now, next. Notice, I want you to begin to practice this in your life. Notice when you initiate a repair attempt. I want you to notice when your spouse initiates a repair attempt. The success or failure of such is an indicator of whether you have an overriding positive sentiment override or the negative. And these are indications of the most important thing in a strong marriage, as we already said, the friendship. So PSO and NSO are important because you're going to filter all the data of your day-to-day interactions through that filter. So you can see that if a couple has a pervading NSO, negative sentiment override, that they are in the what Gottman calls the Roach Motel. You can get stuck in the Roach. You know the idea of a Roach Motel? You get in, but you can't get out. Okay, you guys know that? So here's the thing. If you have negative sentiment override, it creates what's called a feedback loop. And negativity leads to more negativity, leads to more negativity, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So that if you get stuck in that Roach Motel, your repair attempts are going to be far less likely to be successful. Now, the purpose of marriage, as Gottman states, is in the strongest marriages, he says, husbands and wives, they share a deep sense of meaning. They don't just get along, they also support each other's hopes and aspirations and build a sense of purpose into their lives together. Now, in my marriage, my wife and I have a common mission, common purposes, and then we have separate purposes. Like, for instance, the common purpose, anything involved in church, my wife and I are rock solid, a team on that. But then she has some missions she does on her own that I'm not really a part of too much. Like, for instance, she's into real estate. And some of the mission we're doing together, some of the mission, I'm just there to support her, stay up to date with her, give her encouragement, give her as much wisdom as I can. You see that? And the result of that is we have a strong friendship, and we're staying close. And so that's what Gottman's referring to. So often, however, an alternative to that, often, check this out, with reference to conflict, there are deeper hidden issues that fuel the superficial conflict. So you got the superficial conflict, and you think, oh, that's the conflict. No. That's actually stemmed from or derived from a deeper root issue. Okay? That's what Gottman's writing. that fuel superficial conflict, which center around fundamental differences in personality, lifestyle, or values. Thus, most marital arguments cannot be resolved, so it is a waste of time and worse, damaging for a marriage to spend time fighting over things that spring from these fundamental differences, but rather should learn to understand and live with these differences while honoring and respecting each other. That's key. Only then will a couple be able to build meaning and purpose into their marriage. Something that will come up later is sorting conflicts into one of two categories: solvable and non-solvable problems. So here, Gottman takes the time, before he launches into what causes divorce, he takes the time to say this. There are certain things, this is not a blanket statement, there are certain things where it's a personality or value difference between you and your spouse. And you are never going to change your spouse on that. If that were the case, it would be a waste of time to try. Can you see that? Now, we got to be careful here, and I'll say, because it would be too easy for us to simply say, oh, all my problems that are definitely solvable problems, it's just a matter of my personality. So you got to exercise discernment there, because it would be too easy to put everything in that category, and that's not going to help you or anyone. But there is a sense in which that is part of it. Like, there are certain things about my wife's personality, she's not going to change. It's in her DNA, it's in her genetic code, going back generations. And I know that because I spent enough time with her family. It's not going to change. And here we are 18 years into it, and sure enough, it hasn't changed. And guess what? I've learned to love her for it. You know how frustrated I would be if I had to change her and all those things? And I can give you a list right now that are immediately coming to mind, okay? But I won't do that because she's right there. Name two. My wife is going to take on more than she can do. She just is. She's going to say yes when she should say no. She's going to drink a cup of coffee and leave it on the counter, wherever she's at. Whether it's the front porch or the street or the bedroom or a closet, and I will find the dishes around the house, and that's just how it is. And I've learned to make it a little game where I get to go behind her and pick up all the dishes, and they get into the dishwasher and get clean, and I get satisfaction from that. And instead of being annoyed at my wife, I find joy in, like, we're playing this little game that she doesn't even know about, right? And it's like, I get to clean her house, and she doesn't have to worry about that because she's so, and the reason why she's leaving them all around is because she's taking on more than she can do. And I get that about her. I understand that. So why would I ever want to change that, right? It's just going to be frustrating. It's not going to happen. Or asking her to turn the lights off when she leaves the room. Why bother? Just turn them off for her. You know what I mean? I go around, turn off the lights behind her. Just do that for her. Okay. I hope she won't disagree with those. We'll talk later. So just know that. Solvable and non-solvable problems. Now, why marriages fail or how Gottman predicts divorce. And this is a sequence, and it builds on itself. It is possible to be divorced, but not even know it, in a sense. It's possible to be divorced already and not even know it, in a sense. In the sense that you're living together, but have really checked out from each other's lives and are actually lonely. You don't really know each other. You're not engaged with each other anymore. So some people say the next step to that would be divorce, and some people say, you know what, I'm going to suck it up, or I'm just going to stay in the situation. You're going to stay in isolation, you're going to stay in loneliness. So I asked you, what would be the difference between that and divorce? You're living as two individuals, not a couple, not a marriage. You're living as two individuals at the same address, okay? Just putting that out there. So I'm going to summarize the whole chapter in a short paragraph that I came up with, and it's going to feel like drinking from a fire hydrant right now, okay? And then I'm going to delineate a little further, a little more detail. So here it is. Harsh startups, which we'll define later, harsh startups in conflict lead to the four horsemen of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And those are in logical order. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'm going to show you how those work together in just a moment. Criticism and contempt, by the way, criticism, contempt and disgust are forms of shame, just so you know. expressions of shame. Criticism and contempt solicit a defensive response, which results in more criticism and contempt, which results in stonewalling, which results in flooding, which we're going to define, which results in fight or flight response, which makes resolution virtually impossible and causes the repair attempts to either be unnoticed or completely fail, which leads the marriage into isolation and loneliness and out of vulnerability and the possibility of feeling loved, which turns into a cycle, which leads to reinterpreting the couple's history so that it's negative, like I don't even know why we got married, for instance, all while creating negative sentiment override that we just talked about. And all this destroys the friendship that the marriage, along with its intimacy and romance, are built on. And all of this creates a pattern that can be noticed within the first 3 minutes of a conversation, and it is an accurate indicator of future divorce unless the couple receives intervention of some sort. So I know that was a mouthful. So we're going to go back and slow down a little bit. So I'm going to take you back to that sequence, and as soon as we're done with the sequence, we're going to break up into groups. We'll try to go as fast as I can to get you to the exercises. So the first sign, harsh startup. Harsh startup. Conflicts aren't about the issue at hand. Oh no. Conflicts aren't about the issue at hand, but rather they're about shaming each other. Conflicts and the discussion that follows start with criticism and or sarcasm. The word sarcasm means cutting flesh, which is or sarcasm, which is a form of contempt and disgust. Contempt and disgust are parts of shaming your spouse. So if a discussion, which is a fight, begins with criticism and or sarcasm, which Gottman calls a harsh startup. So, okay, within the 3 minutes, if you're dealing with conflict, and one of the two or both uses criticism or sarcasm, Gottman calls that a harsh startup. A harsh startup. So we got repair attempts, we got harsh startups. You're just going to download that onto our vocabulary. If it begins this way, it's a harsh startup, it is doomed to failure 96% of the time. Did you guys catch that? If you have a conflict, you got to resolve it. Within the first 3 minutes, if one of you is using sarcasm or criticism as opposed to, say, complaint, and there's a difference, we'll define that, you will not be resolving the conflict. You might as well stop, eject, come back. Say 20 minutes later, minimum. Just shut it down, because guess what? If it's not going well and someone's already resorted to sarcasm and criticism, it's only going to make things worse. Because the longer you stay in that discussion, the more negativity has a chance to emerge, right? So shut that thing down. Okay. If a discussion begins this way, you might as well call it quits, take a breather, start over. Second sign. So the first sign is harsh startups are emerging. Second sign is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Gottman calls it. Okay, what are the 4 horsemen? We've said it already, we'll say it again. They usually show up in the following order. These are in order, okay? You'll see it makes sense. Number 1, criticism, as we said. 2, contempt. 3, defensiveness. 4, stonewalling. How effective do you think defensiveness is? Why do you think it is people stonewall? Like, what's the reason? Why would someone do that? We're going to see. So the first horseman, criticism. Why do we resort to criticism? There is a world of difference between criticism and complaint. A complaint focuses on a specific behavior or event, while a criticism is global and expresses negative feelings or opinions about the other's character or personality, which is to say, one spouse is shaming the other. So it's not, you did bad, but rather, you are bad. Do you see the difference? Critical difference. Two common forms of criticism are statements that contain, ready? You always, you never. Those absolutely cannot be true. It cannot be true that you always, and it cannot be true that you never. Those are absolute statements. Those are generalizations, characterizations. They cannot be true. It can't be true that they always, absolutely always do something. Okay? So guess what? If you use the statements like you always and you never, you're attacking the person and not the issue at hand. What have you done? You've made your spouse your opponent. You've made your spouse your enemy. What response do you think you're going to get if you've already made them your opponent, your enemy? So pay attention to those. The criticism. You did bad, but rather you are bad. You always, you never. Essentially, you're asking, what's wrong with you? Now, does that encourage you to work a conflict out? Does that just keep you in the right brain state so you can think rationally and come up with a great solution to the problem at hand? When someone says something like, what is the matter with you? That's an interpretation of you always, you never. What's your problem? Like, what's wrong with your genetic code? Like, This is communicating using toxic shame. Now, it may make sense to us that toxic shame is what we want to do, but it is completely counterproductive. It's destructive. It's poison, Gottman says. Poison. Horseman number 2, contempt. Contempt. Contempt arises from a sense of superiority. Contempt arises from a sense of superiority over one's partner. Like I'm up on this pedestal on the stage right now, and I'm looking down at my spouse. I'm superior. That's why I might ask a question. What's the matter with you? Why aren't you as awesome as me? Why don't you have it together like I do? Okay? That you're shaming your spouse. You have contempt for your spouse. That is to say, you have disgust for your spouse. And you believe in your superiority that you always have the moral high ground. You always have the moral high ground, which is a form of disrespect. Contempt includes things like sarcasm, cynicism which always expects negativity in life or from a person. If someone always expects negativity from life or from a person, what do you think you're going to get? It becomes self-fulfilling. Eye rolling. Ever experienced an eye roll? Carla. That's an eye roll. Okay? You're welcome. Did that make you feel encouraged and warm? Eye rolling, mockery, hostile humor. Contempt is poisonous to a relationship because it conveys disgust, which makes resolving a conflict impossible, and leads to more conflict instead of reconciliation. Contempt is the accusation of your spouse being morally deficient or deficient in some other way, again, shame. A person who resorts to contempt is not interested in resolving an issue, but rather in tearing down and demeaning the other person. That's helpful. Contempt is fueled by a long, simmering negative thoughts about your partner from past conflicts that have not been resolved. When contempt is the manner in which a person is engaging, then contempt's close cousin is belligerence. Belligerence. It also usually shows up and is also equally poisonous. Belligerence is a form of aggressive anger containing threat or provocation. A belligerent response to a complaint would be something like, well, what are you going to do about it? Sue me? That's a person being belligerent. Now, if a person's already gotten to contempt and disgust and belligerence, what hope do you think that conflict resolution episode has for actually coming up with a solution that works for everybody? It's not even on the table, is it? It's not even about that anymore. It becomes we're not doing problem solving here, we're doing attacking each other here. So where do you think that's going to lead? Okay, what are you going to do? Sue me? Which leads to horseman number 3, defensiveness. Now, if you're on the receiving end, let's say, of a person who feels superior or has the moral high ground, I'll just testify that in my marriage, guess who, my wife or I, have the superiority moral high ground usually in the history of 18 years, which is no longer the case anymore because my wife, definitely. I mean, she's an expert. It's amazing. So guess what happens when she takes the moral high ground, the superiority? What do I get? What do I get? I get defensive. What is defensiveness, and is it helpful? What is it, and is it helpful? So contempt, if I'm a recipient of contempt, I come up with defensiveness. Let's talk about that for just a moment, which is horseman number 3. Defensiveness is really a way of blaming your spouse. So I feel blamed, so I'm going to blame her, which takes the focus off me. So defensiveness is really a way of blaming your spouse, and all it can do is escalate the conflict. You're saying, in effect, the problem isn't me, it's you. One form of this is playing the innocent victim and whining. I've done that. My wife's shaking her head yes right now, okay? I'm being defensive, so what do? I go into the whining little boy who's childish, playing the victim, innocent, poor innocent me. I didn't do nothing. What's wrong? You know, it's your problem, not mine. I didn't do nothing wrong. So, it says, why are you picking on me? What about the good things I do? There's no pleasing you. All statements I've made. Usually the response to defensiveness is that your partner will climb even higher up their moral high ground. If defensiveness is the response to contempt, then you can see how an escalating feedback loop would be created. We'll come back to that. Now, if I'm being defensive and it's not working, let's say, because defensiveness doesn't work, as we'll see in a moment, guess what the next horseman would be? It would be stonewalling. Why would someone practice stonewalling? Why would they do that? Why would that be a natural response or part of the natural progression of this negative sentiment override? Horseman number 4, stonewalling. In marriages where discussions begin with a harsh startup, where criticism and contempt lead to defensiveness and vice versa, eventually one partner tunes out. Like if you feel like you just can't win, you're not ever going to be heard, guess what? What else do you have left? What's left? What option do you have? Tune out. Drop out. Stonewalling. Which means one partner begins stonewalling. When you disengage, fail to be responsive, turn away, practice avoidance, you are also avoiding your marriage, by the way. Research indicates this practice is far more common among men. Now, that's research, okay? It's scientific research. Now, I would have already said that. You know how I feel about this. Maybe I'm just projecting my own immaturity on the rest of the men, but I don't think so. But he's going to give scientific evidence for why this is more pervasive in men. Usually, there are happy exceptions. A stonewaller gives no feedback in a discussion, but instead looks away or looks down without making a sound, sitting like an impassive stone wall. The stonewaller acts like they couldn't care less about what is being said, if they're even listening. So here's a question. If you're experiencing stonewalling from your spouse, is that because they don't care? Like they just don't care, they're not interested, they're so passive, they're withholding affection, they're just checked out, disengaged completely because they don't care. We're going to answer that question. There's a reason for the stonewalling. Stonewalling usually arrives later in the course of marriage. It takes time for the negativity from the other 3 horsemen to become overwhelming enough that stonewalling becomes an understandable out. Like over time, you keep losing the arguments. You feel, like you put down, like under their thumb, like your face is always being rubbed in the shame. And it just feels like you just can't ever win, can't ever make any progress. What's left? The only way out is stonewalling, you may think. Which leads to a third sign. We're going to come back to the sequence, but we're going to import something now that Gottman calls flooding. Flooding. Like think, as in water flooding, that kind of flooding. So flooding is this. We usually use the word triggered. Triggered. But we want to go beyond the word triggered to flooding, okay? So what's happening with flooding? It may appear that criticism and contempt have no effect on the stonewaller. Your criticism, your contempt, like you're hurling insults, but the person just checked out completely. And it may appear that your insults have no effect on the stonewaller. But nothing could be further from the truth. Usually people stonewall as a protection against feeling what? Feeling what? Psychologically and physically overwhelmed. Now, why would someone feel overwhelmed? There's a very specific reason for this. I want you to get it. They're feeling physiologically, psychologically overwhelmed, and so it's a protection mechanism, a coping strategy for the phenomena that's occurring in front of them. So it's like putting the armor up. They're checking out. You see? They're feeling overwhelmed. A sensation we call, and that physiological, psychological feeling of being overwhelmed is what Gottman is calling flooding. You feel flooded, okay? Now, when I say physiological, I mean it. There's a physical, like heart rate, blood pressure, secretion of hormones like adrenaline. Those are real things that Gottman has measured in all these couples. Okay, that's why it's scientific. When we say scientific data, that's where the science is coming from. He's putting heart rate monitors and stuff on people, okay? And he's measuring what's happening during conflict with couples. That's where the science. Okay, so it occurs when your spouse's negativity is so intense and sudden that it leaves you shell-shocked. You feel so defenseless against the sniper attack that you learn to do anything to avoid a replay. The more often you feel flooded by your spouse's criticism or contempt, the more hyper-vigilant you are for... Wow. The more often you feel flooded by your spouse's criticism or contempt, the more hyper-vigilant you are for being on the, I don't know what I wrote here, for being on the lookout that your spouse is going to blow up again. The more times you experience that, you're just like hyper-vigilant. When's it going to happen again? The flooded stonewaller can only think about protecting himself from how awful the attacks from the spouse are and the emotions he feels during these times. A stonewaller is seeking to protect himself by disengaging emotionally from the relationship. A stonewaller has checked out, and the next step to checking out is divorce. So hold on, put that on the table. We're going to come back to that with reference to the physiological responses. So the fourth sign, our body language. What is our body doing? If you put a bunch of instruments, you can measure all the things your body's doing. During a fight, what data would be created? So our body language or our physiological response to conflict. Flooding is physically distressing. The heart rate and blood pressure elevate, and hormonal changes occur as well, like the secretion of adrenaline. The presence of adrenaline kicks us into, guess what? When adrenaline's actually being secreted, you ever been in a fight and you start to feel the adrenaline run through your veins? You ever felt that? You felt that, right? You feel that. Guess what? Guess why that is? Guess what you're in? You are actually in that moment in fight or flight mode. Fight or flight. It's a survival mechanism. People go into the survival mechanism. Why? Because they perceive that the situation is dangerous. But the elevation in heart rate, blood pressure, adrenaline is an indication that you have gone into fight or flight mode. Now, if you're in fight or flight mode, what are the chances of that conflict resolving in something that's helpful? How well is your rational mind doing at processing data? Recurring episodes of flooding. So the result of the contempt and disgust, let's say, is a person feels flooded. Well, they begin as being defensive, but it's ineffective, so they're starting to get overwhelmed. And so in order to protect themselves, they go into stonewalling. The stonewalling really coincides with being in a fight or flight mode. All these things working together. Recurring episodes of flooding leads to divorce for two reasons. Two reasons. One, they signal that at least one partner feels severe emotional distress when dealing with the other. Two, the physical sensations of feeling flooded and having gone into an adrenaline-fueled fight or flight mode make it virtually impossible to have a productive, problem-solving discussion. This all means that your body perceives your current situation as dangerous. Your ability to process information is reduced. It's harder to pay attention to what your spouse is even saying. Creative problem-solving goes out the window, and you're left with the most knee-jerk, least intellectually sophisticated responses in your repertoire. To fight or flight. So to fight, to act critically, contemptuous, defensive, or flee, which is fleeing. In fight or flight, fleeing is stonewalling. You're maybe in the room, but you've already checked out. Further discussion in these moments only makes it worse. You guys feeling encouraged yet? Now, I probably have to skip this because, we'd have to skip this. Maybe we'll pick this up next week. I got to get to the fifth sign. And, okay, so I can't get to the fifth sign and the sixth sign. But guess what? Gottman's going to argue this. He's going to argue that a lot of therapists and counselors, say going back a few decades at least, have said, okay, the problem is the conflict. The problem is the conflict. The problem is you need better communication. This is a previous chapter. And so it's all about conflict resolution and better communication skills, right? But Gottman says that fails. That has a high probability of failure. And even if people begin to do that, a lot of times they revert back. And he makes the case of this. The number one thing that's going to get rid of this whole sequence that I've been describing and didn't get a chance to finish with is bringing in friendship. The friendship is what would smash all that to smithereens. So you can be reactive and try to stop doing some things, or you can go proactive and try to say, okay, let's try to build our friendship. Let's try to build the love we have for each other. Therefore, we begin to experience things are no longer being filtered through that negative lens that we've been using because we've already been building up this bank of positivity between each other. Such that when my partner fails, I say things like, man, she must be really tired, instead of, why does she hate me so much? You see the difference? My wife just may need some rest. She's tired because she normally wouldn't do this. I'm interpreting her actions in light of positive sentiment instead of negative sentiment, like, why did I ever marry her? Which you guys have never said. So I wish I could spend more time here, I really do. But that all brings us to principle one, okay? To principle one. And his first principle is enhance your love maps. Enhance your love maps. What does that mean? Now, around our church, we define love. Love equals self-sacrifice. And we define it as love is to feel seen, known, and understood. Okay? That's critical. Absolutely important. Now, that being said, love equals feeling seen, known, and understood. What is Gottman arguing for? We need to get to know each other better. Now, how well do you think you know your spouse? How well? That's what this first exercises are about. Enhance your love maps. Many married couples fall into the habit of inattention to the details of their spouse's life. Like when you were dating, you were all about every little detail. What she was into, what she was doing, what he was into, what he's doing, right? Maybe he was into sports, so you watch all of the games with him. But now that you've been married a long time, you're like, I hate sports. That's his thing. I don't want to, you have no idea what he's excited about as far as who's going to the Super Bowl this year, for instance. You just don't care anymore. Why? Because, you know what? You don't care about the details of your spouse's life, and vice versa. That's a problem. They may have only a vague sense of the other's joys, likes and dislikes, fears and stresses. In contrast, emotionally intelligent couples are intimately familiar with each other's world. Gottman calls this having a richly detailed love map. Without such a love map, you can't really know your spouse. And if you don't really know someone, how can you truly love them? That's a quote from Gottman. Gottman goes on to say, this is his quote, "No wonder the biblical term for sexual love is to know." And I think throughout the book I found three vague references that Gottman makes to Scripture. So I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he's certainly not negative towards Christianity. But this is his first one. He says, where'd it go? You can't really know your spouse, and if you don't really know someone, how can you truly love them? No wonder the biblical term for sexual love is to know, which, for instance, Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife. He knew her, and she conceived and bore Cain. So we know what to know her means, right? Okay, she conceived and bore a son, Cain. So major life events, like you have a baby. I think like he said, like 64% of people who have a baby, marriage goes down. The other, like another 24%, it goes up. Why is that? The reason for that is because you know your wife, right? Oh, you thought you know her. She just changed. Now she wants to quit her career and focus on the baby. That's a serious life change, right? So you may have known the past her, but do you know the present her? Because we're all changing. You don't step through the same stream twice. So major life events or just the passage of time can cause your spouse to change. Thus, a detailed love map updates must be continually downloaded. The more you know and understand about each other, the easier it is to stay connected when conflict comes. This reminds us of our definition of love. Love is the willingness to sacrifice. I just went over that. So, you got to get to know your spouse. And these exercises, there's a ton of them. You're not going to finish tonight. You're not going to finish tonight. So we're going to spend the remaining time we have, which I'll leave when you guys leave, but we say at 8:30 if you want to go to 9. If you're done at 8:30, get up and go. That's fine. There's no shame there. If you want to stay longer because you're into something, feel free. We'll keep the lights on. We're not going to kick you out, okay? I'll be done when you're done. One of the exercises, read the directions, by the way. One of the exercises requires a journal. So I provided these journals. These actually are different, well made, okay? These are sewn in binding, so they actually will last a while, even though they're inexpensive. So there's a journal and pen, so grab one of those. If you don't have a book, let me know. I'm going to give you one right now. So if you need a book, come get one. I want to do the married couples first and then the singles. So if you need a book, please come get one, because you're going to need it right now. You're welcome. You're welcome. For you, Bill, one each. Just because the exercises mainly. Hey, if you need a journal, raise your hand. Andrew's going to come by. Yeah, COVID, man. Supply chain. So you'll find a pen in the chair behind you, hopefully, or in front of you, hopefully. If not, there's pens up here as well. Mary?
Each couple gets 2 or each couple gets
1 what? Oh, yeah, one each. One each. And hopefully you'll be sharing what you've written with each other. Hopefully. Now, can't force you to, but I argue this. Your journal can end up literally being one of the most valuable things you possess. Like if the house is burning down, you're grabbing your journal. It may end up being something you want to pass on to your kids. Okay, it's because you're going to be telling your story. Like I would love to have a journal of my dad answering these specific questions, because I love to get to know my mom and dad, even now, because getting to know them tells me about me so much. So anyway, no one can force you to write something you don't want to write, but we're big fans of journaling around here. Big fans of journaling. Journaling is important for a lot of reasons, but one reason is this. In life, no one escapes shame. No one escapes pain. Nobody. And we end up carrying around a burden with us. And journaling is a way to help set the burden down. The burden, the pain, the shame has to go from the inside to the outside so you can let it go. Journaling accomplishes that. Oftentimes we carry these ruminations with us that make sense in our head, but when you get them out on paper, they lose their force, they lose their power. The grip loosens, and you can begin to learn to walk away. Even beyond that, you can begin to learn to reassign the meaning of that past experience, all because you've written it down. Guess what else it facilitates? It facilitates being seen, known, and understood. Journaling, actually, you don't have to share it with somebody else. No one can force you. But if you do, it means you're taking your armor off, stepping back into vulnerability, and allowing someone to truly know you. And it's worth it. It's scary, it's risky, but it's worth it because it allows you to be loved. And if you haven't done that, then your love is going to take the hit to some degree, okay? So there it is. I'm going to release you. You can go when you want. If you have any questions, come see me. We got journals. We got books. You guys should be set. Go anywhere in the building. Begin. The first exercise is, let me just tell you the page number. You guys find it? Exercise 1 at the end of chapter 4. Chapter 4 is only like 3 pages.
Are we supposed to do all of the exercises?
Now, in the instructions, it's going to say, for instance, there's a list of 100 questions, for instance. He says, draw some numbers and choose like 10 or 15 or 20 of them. And those are the short ones. When it comes to the journaling part, it's going to say pick some. But then he's going to encourage you, please, when you have the time, come back and answer all the questions. Okay? So it's a lot, but Gottman's not asking you to do every single thing. Now, you may begin to enjoy it and want to. Okay, so read the instructions. It's going to tell you specifically how much he suggests you do, which is not the whole thing.
My question though is there's 3 exercises at the end of the
I want them all done, and here's where it's going to be challenging, guys, because it's going to take time. But that's where I say, and it just really is, okay? And I'm just full disclosure, but you're going to get out what you put in. That's what I was referring to earlier. So if you'll take the time, some of us, we're going to have to sit down with our spouse every night of the week. Some weeks, not every week, some weeks to move through it. But hopefully, of necessity, your love maps are going to be increasing. But hopefully, you'll begin to learn to enjoy this. And maybe for some of us, for the first time, it's facilitating you coming to know another person in a way you never have before, because you never asked any of the details. I know where I was raised, dating relationships, we always kept it shallow. Deep questions weren't allowed. That was weird, inappropriate, awkward. So you may come to know someone like you never have before. So be all in. It's worth it, okay? So yeah, I want you to do all the exercises. It's an honor system. You're not going to get kicked out. You're not going to be checked on. I'm not going to break into your house to peek into your journal or your book. It's an honor system, but I just want to encourage you, get the full benefit, okay? Which is going to require your spouse. So my wife and I, we don't have kids yet. We don't have kids, so we can spend a lot of time like this. Right, Rebecca? Okay. For the singles, I want to talk to the singles. Jack, you already have the instructions, so the singles can go with Jack, and where do you guys want to meet? You want to go in, I was thinking room 3 with a sofa where it's comfortable? Wherever. Jack has the instructions. He's not going to be here next week, so if you guys can decide who wants to do it next week, and then he'll be back the following 6 weeks. Thanks, guys. Oh, you're going to need journals and pens, too. Awesome. I just selected from all the material what I thought was most helpful for you guys. So if you want to go back, there's more stuff there. And I'll say this, I'm a big fan of journaling. The questions he's asking are one, a lot of the same questions we've already asked, or two, they're an addition, and they're just excellent. They're just really good. Like, I'm going to be going through all of them myself with my wife. So, did you guys get a book? Okay. Jack?
I get a digital one, but honestly, I like digital has its benefits. Yeah, but the first
I always like both hands.
Digital slippery papers.
But you can't copy.
No, but this is going to last longer. What? This is going to last longer. Truth to that.
Where do you want to go, big boy?
So anywhere in the building, you have any questions, come see me. Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to put a piece of paper back there on the table. If you'd like me to email you the notes, and I don't have your email address, you can write your email address, put it on the table, and I'll email you when I get home tonight.